Hey guys, what's up? iPenguin Pat here, and today we're going to talk about something that I bet none of you are expecting coming from me. That's right, we are talking about the 12 best changes Forge of Empires has made since the Ark? Okay, maybe not since the Ark, maybe just since I've been playing, because that's all I can speak to. So, with that said, before I get started, if you aren't already subscribed, please subscribe, hit the notifications, and like the video because it helps me out a ton. And with no further ado, we're going to get right into it. So, the first change that I think was awesome, and no particular order, was adding the auto battle from the main screen. Now, previously, if you wanted to auto battle, what you would have to do is you would have to go into the fight, right? So we come in here and we go attack, and then you couldn't hit auto battle. You had to say, oops, don't want to do that. You had to say attack, and then you had to hit auto battle from here. And then you get your results, and then you're back out, right? Now, that made fighting so tedious and so slow, and it basically made it so that there was no serious advantage of totally decking out your city with tons of attack, because when you go in and say you skip your first turn and then auto battle, well, you don't take many losses, right? So when you started being able to attack from that main screen, that meant that you were fighting a lot faster. And it basically gave players that were clever a major advantage. So this was one of the absolute best changes, and it really made the game a lot more dynamic and exciting. And I think it was an awesome change. The second change that they made that I think was an excellent change is adding the colony and the ore. Now, when you keep in mind that we had just come off of the Arctic future with Prometheum and the Oceanic future with Orich or Calcum, I don't even know how to say it. But nevertheless, those were major bottlenecks. They took forever. They were miserable. Everyone hesitates to even move out of future because Arctic future and Oceanic future suck so bad because of those goods. And the colony and the way that they did the map just made this so much more pleasant to have some sort of bottleneck, something that to kind of slow you down and restrict you some, without it completely being the most miserable process ever, like OF is. And on top of that, the colony made it easy to start producing tons of goods as long as you stayed active and you kept your resources up. And that was kind of a little bit of a soft nerf to Chateau and Recurring Quest. Not so much because they actually was a direct nerf, but it basically made it so much easier to produce tons of goods really fast and really easily. And that indirectly made it so that the recurring quests that you're doing with Chateau were less powerful and less meaningful because you could just make the stuff from the colony. It also kind of made it so that the gap between the haves and the have-nots wasn't quite as wide. So that was definitely a really good change that they made. Best change number 3 was adding the antique dealer. This was actually a really nice add that I am really glad that they added. Obviously, there were players that had been playing the game for a long time and just had a crazy inventory full of buildings that they would never use. And frankly, the longer you play, the more you end up accumulating these buildings that you're never going to use. And on top of that, you have events that you go into, and maybe you end up being one upgrade short or something like that, or one piece short from a set. All kinds of things that can get in the way and be a little bit frustrating. And the antique dealer was the perfect answer to all of that. It gave players a way to get rid of the junk in their inventory and not just delete it. And it also gave players a way to pick up items that they needed in order to progress their city and continue to develop as a player. This is actually how I developed the majority of my city. Pretty much all of these Royal Marble gateways, well, they had to have come from the antique dealer because it hasn't been a daily special that I can think of. Maybe it has been. Also, things like my checkmate squares, those all also came from the antique dealer. And even a lot of my Winners Plazas were at least based out of the antique dealer. So this was a really huge deal. And I think that that was absolutely one of the best, most player-friendly changes that NO made. Moving on to number 4 is adding custom forge points. Now, if you weren't playing before this went into effect, then this probably doesn't seem like a very big deal to you. But if you remember the time before this, then you know how big of a deal this was. You see, before this, you could only add 10 forge points at a time. So imagine what it was like if you were trying to lock a place where you had to add, say, 2,000 forge points. That meant that you had to hit the use 10 forge point pack 200 times. Yes, that's right, 200 times. Okay? Now, to make matters even worse, and to make it more crazy, is that at that time it was very common to do lots of sniping and whatnot. Sniping isn't nearly as common now as it was then, at least in my opinion. And there would be these times where two players would go to take a place at the same time, and you would tap the add 10 forge points as fast as you could, and it would just lag out, and then all of a sudden you would crash, and you wouldn't know what happened, and one person got first place, and someone else got second place, and you went half and half, and somebody got killed on it, right? So it was so just wild and crazy. It was the wild, wild west back when you could only add 10 forge points at a time. I mean, kind of queued up. It was kind of going like 500 blocks or so. Point being, this was a really nice player-centric change. It made it much easier to add those huge forge points amounts that you needed for the larger great buildings as they continued to level up. Obviously, before Ark, this probably wasn't that big a deal. You weren't really ever adding thousands of forge points at once anyway, but especially after having the Ark, this was a must-have, and it was a very good change. The next change that I think a lot of people are going to be surprised about is the Guild Expedition updates. Now, again, this is one of those ones that on the surface may not seem like a big deal, especially for an advanced player, but this is actually a really nice upgrade. Okay, first of all, adding attack and defense, both making that an option in Guild Expedition was great. Plenty of players had tons of Face of the Ancient and Gate of the Sun God just lying around, so turning those into useful pieces, especially for beginning players, made this a really nice update. Even now, there are advanced players that are still using Gate of the Sun God and Face of the Ancient in their city to fill in space because they don't need to be connected to road, so that is actually really good. Very underrated, very underrated. Obviously, Ritual of Flames are kind of a waste. Defense for your city just really doesn't matter. The tribal squares, again, the extra 5 goods going to 10 goods, really, that's not all that useful. However, the Sacred Skywatch, that's definitely a nice bump, but the Terrace Farm, that was actually a huge bump. And the reason why that was so big is because you went from 5 to 12. That also made it so that Blue Galaxy was a significantly stronger building, even for an early player who hadn't done tons of events. This immediately made it so that players could start having a big Forge Point collection to go with their Blue Galaxy. And the other thing is it just helped players to develop faster. When you could go through one guild expedition and potentially start making an extra 12 Forge Points a day, especially in the beginning of the game, that was huge. And then, of course, the shrink kit for the Fountain of Youth is obviously a very nice thing. And what's really interesting is that the shrink kit for the Fountain of Youth comes up so often that I actually find that in my Wishing Well worlds, all of my Fountain of Youth are shrunk because I have so many shrink kits just laying around. Definitely a good change, and it was definitely needed. Power creep was making it so that a lot of these items were no longer useful, and this change made it so that they could be competitive and they were worth continuing to have in your city. Speaking of selection kits, moving right along, the other thing that was an excellent change is the addition of selection kits in general and just having all kinds of additional sets and things like that. The selection kit basically made it so that players could start doing really crazy set configurations that were really pretty difficult to do when you only had 1 day or 2 days to get all of the same type of thing. Like, could you imagine only being able to get like your Shakira Rock once per event, and that's it, and that's all you had, and if you didn't get it all on that day, you were hosed? Now, having the selection kit, it gives you more options for getting all of the pieces of your sets, and also, of course, making it so that you can upgrade these special buildings like the Colossus or the Ferris wheel or whatever it is that you are leveling up. And I think that it added a ton of variety. When I started playing, basically every city was just like a sea of terrace farms and shrines of knowledge. I mean, that was like literally, and then like the diamond guys might have big cherry sets, or they might have like big palace sets, which you don't even see anymore, right? But that was it. There was basically no variety. Everyone had basically the same city. Now you see all kinds of variations. The cities are so much more dynamic, and that is definitely in part to adding these selection kits. Now, some players are loaded with abandoned asylums, and others have governor's villas, and others have the pirate thing. And it's just, there's such a variety. You don't see cities that look exactly the same the way that they used to. And that made the game a lot more enjoyable all around. Definitely a good player centric change. Thumbs up on that. So, speaking of selection kits and speaking of shrinking, adding the shrink kits is the next big change on my list, number 7. And obviously, we just talked about the Fountain of Youth, but then also the Wishing Well and the Rogue Den. Definitely big, awesome changes. Now, one thing that you may not think about is that this is actually a much bigger, it's not just 3 squares that you drop, you actually drop 3.5 squares because of the road required, provided that you are setting up your city so that you are only touching on the short side. That means that you're not only having 3 less, 3 less squares for your Fountain of Youth, but you're also 1 less road. That is terrific. Granted, the other side of the road, blah, 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 it's a half a square when it's all said and done. Bottom line is this made it so that Wishing Well worlds, you could fit even more into your world. And then adding the Rogue Den was also awesome. Switching from a 2x3 to a 2x2 made it so much easier to fit in rogues wherever you wanted. Now, a lot of cities, you might only have 1 or 2 rogue hideout, rogue den, whatever you want to call them, and that really wasn't a very big change for you. But for players that have lots of rogue hideouts, it's really nice not having to worry about which direction the road runs. You could have rogue hideouts running this way. You can have rogue hideouts running this way. Doesn't matter at all because it's 2x2. It's great. So I absolutely love that change. I'm so glad that they put that in. Very well done. Moving on to the next excellent player-centric change, and this one might be the most underrated of them all, especially for, again, players that were more developed. That is the space carrier. Now, hear me out on this because I realize that a lot of you, especially you hardcore fighters, don't even bother doing negotiations a lot of times, so this seems like it's not really that big a deal. But if you are somebody who was not already in the max age when this came out and you had not gotten past Arctic Future and Oceanic Future, this thing was awesome. This cut so much time off of getting through Arctic and Oceanic Future compared to the path that you had to take prior to this great building coming out. Now, on top of that, the forge points per square, the goods per square, the rogues, the diamonds, all the other stuff that this gives you are just a cherry on top. This is actually one of the best forge point per square buildings, great buildings, and one of the fastest return on your investment great buildings in the game. And I'm not even a big forge point great building fan. You guys already know that if you know me well. But that special good boost was huge, and it definitely made it so that more players would move on up from Future up into the higher ages. Because before this came out, I'm telling you, there was no reason to move up from Future. People would continue to sit in Future for, Space Age Mars came out and nobody even bothered moving up because it wasn't worth it. There wasn't enough benefit to move up and nobody wanted to go through Arctic and Oceanic. This definitely helped to fix that problem. Well done. Moving on to number 9, and this one is going to raise some eyebrows. Guild Battlegrounds. That's right. You guys all know that I am not a big fan of Guild Battlegrounds. In fact, I have a channel on my Discord, which you should join, called I Hate Guild Battlegrounds. And I do hate Guild Battlegrounds. But this was a really good change, especially in its original implementation before players figured out how to use and abuse this thing. This made it so that mobile players had a reason to get more involved in the competitive aspects of the game. This also changed the mentality of the game, and it went from being completely forge point centric and everybody focused on getting their great buildings leveled up as high as they could, just a very old school mentality, and this shifted players to be much more combat oriented because basically you could turn fighting and combat into forge points, right? It transcended the thinking of what was going on before this came out. And frankly, it also helped to dramatically increase the development speed for a lot of players. Being in a guild that was doing sector swaps and being able to generate literally thousands of forge points just basically from nowhere helped to make it so that players could rapidly develop their cities so much faster than they were being able to do. This increased the scale of forge points, and it really did increase the power creep. That is one of the downsides. Now, I'm going to hold all of my critiques of Battlegrounds back. That's not what this video is about. The bottom line is that this helped to bring a new level of competition and a new level of excitement and got mobile players more involved, at least for a while. So I'll do another video to talk about the flip side of Battlegrounds. Moving on to the next one, the production carousel. Now, there were actually a couple of iterations of the production carousel, and this update here was for the unit version of it. And this is actually one of my favorite changes. If you guys have seen me from way back when, and you remember when I used to have like 20 archer camps in my city, you would know that I had so many units that I had to reset, and it was so tedious and it took forever. Now it is so much easier to just reset units, to reset productions. This was a change that really needed to happen for a long time, and this version, this implementation of it is done quite nicely. And again, this was a really good player-centric change. Well done, kudos, and thank you very much, because what I just did there in the past would have taken me, I don't know, that took me 15 seconds, and that would have taken me 2 or 3 minutes of clicking all over the place and misclicking and getting mad because I accidentally diamond rushed a unit and all that. And were I to have my rows and rows of archer camps, it would even be a bigger bonus. So the production carousel is absolutely amazing. Big kudos there. Moving on to the next one. I believe this was the first event that introduced defense for attacking army. That's right. We got the Olympic Treasury and we got the Sentinel Outpost. And this is kind of a bittersweet thing for me because this basically made it so that great buildings became significantly less important for players becoming developed. Prior to this, you had to level your fighting trinity, your Zeus, your Cathedral of Aachen, however you want to say it, your Castle Del Mont. You had to level your Terracotta Army. Once this happened, you didn't even have to have those great buildings to boost your defense for attacking army. And this made it so that players could be significantly more aggressive in the way that they fought in Battlegrounds, more aggressive in the way that they fought in Guild versus Guild. And overall, it just really increased the power cap for fighters. And it also made it so that the difference between the haves and the have-nots and the planning and all that, it just widened the gap. Right, it widened the gap. I don't know if you call it skill gap. I mean, you call it planning gap, maybe. Somebody who could plan their city better to optimize their space. But this absolutely was such a nice boost for players that like to fight and like to fight a lot. And finally, number 12, the 12th change was the daily special switch. Now, I don't remember what the first event was. The wildlife event was the first one that I could find, but it might have happened before that. I don't remember. I'm getting old and I'm retired and all kinds of stuff like that. Not really, but kind of. And this was such a good change. Every event that they include the daily special swap, you hear me praise this up and down because it is so much more fun having more opportunities to get that daily special that you're trying to get. It is so defeating to know that the daily special that you want is only going to come up once during the event, and it comes up like on the second day and you haven't done the quest line and you barely have any event currency to spend to try to get the daily special, and then the whole rest of the event you're banging your head against the wall because everything else that comes up is not interesting to you. This totally fixed that. This totally made it so that if you need to get that upgrade, or if you're not interested in the garbage, whatever the heck it is that they put up on the thing, this gives you a chance. Even if it's just a roll of the dice, that's better than nothing, right? That is so much better than nothing. And I would say that most events that have had this daily special swap, I have had at least one or two times where the daily special swapped into the exact prize that I wanted, and I was able to get more of that prize than I would have otherwise. This is a very player-friendly, excellent change. I don't know who suggested it. I don't know whose idea it was, but kudos. I liked it a lot. So there you have it, guys. I have openly been extremely critical of all of the anti-player changes that have been happening lately, and people have said, you complain a lot, you hate Inno, you're a hater, rah rah rah. The reality is, this is a game that I had a lot of fun playing for almost 4 years, and these changes that happened, that went into play, were a big part of what continued to make it fun to keep playing. So I'm going to hold back any of the criticism that I have been throwing out there, at least for this video, and say, well done, guys. This has been fun. These changes have been awesome, and it has been better because of them. If you guys enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, share, visit us on Discord, and I will catch you in the next video.